aside.
Let's move on.
Yes, let's go on. Right, I better agree to Zoom there. So thank you very much to everyone for coming. This is, I think, at least for the next little while, the last of our joint seminars. It'd be good to try and keep this kind of thing going. But you know, the summer is fast approaching, and as are holidays and various other things. So last one for a little bit, but we have lined up today Professor Gabriela Ochoa, who is based here in Stirling and has got a very interesting talk on the things that she's been working on. So I will hand over to her.
Okay. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Can everybody hear me well? Can you hear me, Sandy? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So yes, this talk is related to the work I have been doing on fitness landscape analysis and visualization. But traditionally, applying LOMs and now search trajectory network have been done mainly in canonical or classical combinatorial problems such as the traveling salesman problem, the quadratic assignment problem, the NK landscape, etc. So I thought that it would be interesting to try to apply these tools to more complex or more current domains. And Neuroevolution is one of those domains that is currently having an interest and a growth in terms of research. So that's the plan. So I will present work on local Optima networks and search trajectory networks applied to Neuroevolution. And the first part is in collaboration with Stefano, which is a PhD student in Stirling, and Jason, who is a second supervisor of Stefano. And the second part is very recent collaboration with Nada Berapin, who was here in Stirling as a research fellow, but now is in Lille. So that's the plan. So the general motivation for fitness landscape analysis and search trajectory networks is to bring new visualization and analysis tools. So in metaheuristics, we have too many metaheuristics or bio-inspired algorithms, social-inspired algorithms, and sometimes it is not clear why they work or which one can be selected for a particular problem. And so the idea is to bring these visualization tools to increase our understanding of both algorithms and problems, why some algorithms are more suitable than others, or why some instances of problems are harder to solve than others. And hopefully with increased understanding, we can also come with informed, better algorithm selection, better algorithm configuration. We can also talk about landscape-aware metaheuristics, which somehow use information of the understanding of the problem in order to perform better. So that's the overall goal. And in terms of the outline of the presentation, I'd like to start with a brief introduction to Neuroevolution. As I mentioned, Neuroevolution is not a new topic. It has roots in the late 80s and early 90s. There was a particular system called NEAT, I will describe it later in detail, in 2002 that became very popular. And many research have been done in Neuroevolution using this system or the follow of those systems. There is a new term, which is coined more recently in 2017 from a different community, more from the machine learning community, and it's called Neural Architecture Search, or NAS. And even though it's a new term, it overlaps with previous topics such as meta-learning or hyperparameter optimization or Neuroevolution. And I will talk also, because the models I will be presenting are network-based, I will discuss briefly complex network, which is an interdisciplinary topic, which exploded near the 2000s. So if you want to see how influential can be certain papers, so those papers that are related to complex networks published in Nature and Science in the late 90s, this is the amount of citations I checked today. This is the amount of citation that this paper have, only a single paper. This one have close to 50,000 citations. So it's influential and it's interdisciplinary. Complex networks are used in biology, in social science, etc. So I think it's interesting also to use them in metaheuristics and optimization. So that what I will present is two case studies. The first case study used search trajectory networks. Even though search trajectory networks were proposed in 2020, I will present them first because it was applied first to Neuroevolution. And the second case study is application of local Optima networks to neural architectural search space. So that's the plan. Yeah, I would like to, when I talk about topology and neural network architectures, I found this visualization, which is from the Asimov Institute. just to illustrate that there are new neural architectures popping up every now and then, and it's hard to keep track of them. So this is the person who presented this, who proposed this kind of chart. And here you will see what we mean by architecture. What we mean by architecture or topology of the network is the pattern of connection. You will see that we have different types of cells, or I prefer to call them units or neurons. And we can have a different number of layers, the pattern of connectivity between the layers. So you can see all things like the perceptron or the deep feed forward network, and more complicated deep convolutional inverse graphic network, etc. So there's a lot of variety of possible architectures of neural networks. And if we go to deep learning, so this type of visualization that you find here, not only at the level of neurons or cells, so they are so large. In this case, this is an existing classical convolution neural network called VGG16. It was proposed by this group in Oxford. That's where the VGG come from. And it was the architecture that was the winner of this visual image competition in 2014. So now, instead of visualizing the architecture by the neurons or the units, they visualize it by layers. So it has 16 layers with weights and over 130 million weights. So it's a huge neural network. And what I want to point out here is that it's organized in blocks of layers. So there are 5 blocks, which you can see here. And this block has what they call motifs or sequences of layers. And this one have, for example, a convolution of the convolutional layers here are in blue, followed by a max pooling layer. And you can see also that's the image. And then the resolution is halved every block. So this is a hand-designed neural architecture. But there are many. There is the ResNet, the AlexNet, etc. So there are many architectures that have been designed by hand. So neuroevolution, as I mentioned, is not a new topic. It's an old topic, but there are different ways of viewing or different approaches to neuroevolution. Initially, the idea was to have a fixed network topology and evolve only the weights with genetic algorithms. Then there were some approaches that will evolve both the weights and the topology. And this is, for example, what NEAT does. NEAT means Neuroevolution of Augmented Topologies. And I will explain later, this is an example of genotype, but you have a list of nodes and a list of connection, and you can see that the weights are part of the genotype. So you are evolving the weights, and this is a genotype that can grow and shrink. So you are evolving simultaneously the weights and the topology. There are other approaches, and this is more what neural architecture search likes. You evolve the topology, the connectivity pattern, the layers, etc., but the weights are learned with gradient-based methods. And while in Neuroevolution, there are approaches that you can evolve other components, you can evolve the hyperparameters or even the learning rules. So that's different flavors to Neuroevolution. So neural architecture search, as I mentioned, is a more recent topic, term, and it was the term itself was proposed by these 2 authors. So the idea here is that you can perform search not only with evolutionary algorithms, you can use other methods, and you will not search for weights. The weights are learned with the gradient-based method, but you evolve with the topology. So what is interesting is that these problems are formulated as combinatorial problems. It's not, you're not evolving the weight, but you're evolving the structure. And that's what rings the bell to me. I mean, I have been working for so long in combinatorial optimization, so it will be really nice to try to apply local Optima networks to this domain. So in neural architecture search, well, the different search spaces have been proposed. The more classical will be this chain of layers, so a chain architecture. You have all other architectures that have skip connections. But the one I'm going to be presenting is that I mentioned at the beginning that you have these motifs. So the idea that the deep neural networks are combined by these kind of blocks. So some space they call it cell-based. So you don't evolve the whole architecture, you evolve part of it. So I will describe it in more detail. As I mentioned, the search strategy doesn't have to be necessarily an evolutionary algorithm. There have been approaches, I think Wolfram is involved in one using NSGA2, but there have been approaches using reinforcement learning, there have been approaches using even hill climbing or other approaches. And an important aspect is also how to perform estimation, because these neural networks are solving classification problems, and they are very costly to train. And there are some approaches to try, even surrogate models have been used, or trying to downplay the number of epochs, etc. So having proxies of the performance, because it's very computational expensive. Okay, so in terms of introducing complex networks, networks or graphs have been there since the 18th century with Euler. So if graph is the mathematical object, a network is the data-driven instantiation of a graph. And you can see here a very, very large network that from a biology paper. This is a protein homology network. I just want to point out how large it is. So 32,000 nodes and over 1.2 million edges, and still can be visualized. So this is encouraging that we can visualize very large things. And yes, so complex networks have become a tool to study complex systems in general, in biology, in social sciences, in engineering, etc. So because I am very much interested in network visualization, I would like to briefly introduce some concepts related to network visualization. So it's a field in itself. Network visualization is the art of choosing an appropriate representation that is both aesthetically pleasing, but also importantly reveals the characteristics, the structural properties of the networks. So the most common way of representing networks is what we call the node edge diagram. So the nodes are represented as geometrical shapes. It could be circles, it could be triangles, etc. And the edges are represented by lines. So one important aspect of network visualization is what we call the network layout. The network layout is how to place the nodes and edges in the plane, or in 3D, if you're visualizing in 3D. So what is important to understand is that the graph of a network is a mathematical object. What defines it is the pattern of connection, and there is not a single way of visualizing it. So this is very nicely represented here in this example. This is the same network, same pattern of connectivity, but the layout is different. So the first random layout doesn't reflect anymore too much about the structure of the network, while the other two layouts kind of express some of the structure, interesting aspects of this particular graph. So the network layout I have been using, they are available to you when you use one of the libraries for graph visualization. So they are called force-directed graph layouts. They are called like that because they are using a physical analogy. So in this layout, the nodes are considered particles which are charged, and then there is two forces that are competing. So there is electrical forces that are repelling, and then if there is an edge between the nodes, there is a spring between them. So there are attracting force and repelling force. So these algorithms, which some of them are, by the way, underlined, running simulated annealing or optimization because they want to minimize the energy. So these algorithms place the vertices in the plane and try to have them evenly distributed, try to minimize the number of crossing, and try to respect symmetries in the graph. So these are the names of the algorithms I've been using mostly for network visualization. And this is a particular animation that I like. I took it from this place where you can see the same graph, the same connectivity pattern, but visualized in different ways. You can see here the name of the layout. Some of them are force directed, some of them are more simple, like a circle layout, or there is a grid layout as well, grid here, etc. So there are many ways of representing the same network. And some of the work that I have been doing, I agonized, trying different layouts to see which one reflects more the structure of what you want to show. Apart from visualizing the network, of course, we can compute metrics. As a mathematical object, a graph, there is a long tradition of metrics. Again, the libraries give you this possibility. So there are three types or three groups of possible metrics. You can compute distance metrics between nodes, like the diameter of the average sorted path. You can compute metrics related to the connectivity pattern or topologies, such as the degree distribution, what is the mean degree. Remember, degree is just the number of incident edges in a node. There are other metrics which are associated to nodes. For example, centrality is an important metric. So for example, this node is very central. we have a high degree, but there are other, like edge centrality or betweenness centrality. There are many metrics of centrality. And another group of metrics which is very interesting is related to cohesion. Cohesion meaning that within the network, there are some nodes which are more densely connected between themselves than with the rest of the network. In social networks, they call it community detection, community structure, finding communities in the network, or it can be also called like clustering, finding groups of nodes. Some computing network metrics is relevant if we want to do things like, performance prediction or algorithm selection based in machine learning. So we have done that in the past using network metrics as to increase the number of metrics that you can use to describe performance and also doing algorithm selection. Okay, so I will go to the first case study, which is search trajectory networks. And I'm just putting here 2 examples just to say that search trajectory networks can be implemented, visualized in 2D or in 3D. And we have also combined in the same graph object the trajectories of different algorithms. In this particular case, we are visualizing 3 algorithms, an ant colony algorithm, a GA, and an iterated local search. And because they are traversing the same problem, the same instance, we can try to see whether there are convergences of the different algorithms, etc. I will explain in more detail what there is, but basically the idea of the motivation behind STNs. I know I'm presenting STNs first and longs. Normally I do the other way around. The idea of STNs came from trying to generalize longs, because longs, you use it as a model of landscapes, and it's relevant if you have a search problem where there is, or search algorithm where there is a local search component. But if you have an algorithm where there is no hill climbing or no local search, then it will be interesting to have also a network-based approach. And basically the other motivation is as well to have a tool that allows you to explore the dynamics of algorithms. By dynamics, I mean what happened across the generations, which is not only in the objective space or in the fitness space. So the traditional tool that we use to see what is the dynamic of the algorithm is this type of curve. I take this image from the internet because it's kind of very neutral. So the typical thing is that we have an improved genetic algorithm, which is, if we are maximizing, does better than we have the traditional genetic algorithm, which does worse over time. But we are only seeing what is happening in the fitness space. We don't have a clue of what's going on in the decision space or in the search space. So I think our STNs try to bring a new tool that allows you to see what happened, not only at the fitness or objective space, but also at the decision or variable space. That's the idea. So I will introduce some of the definitions for search trajectory networks. So basically, we need to represent the state of a search with a solution. So we say that we call something a representative solution of the search state to indicate what is happening in the search. So what is the representative solution, for example, in a population-based algorithm? Well, we can say the representative solution is the best in the population. If it is a single-based algorithm, we say that, like simulated annealing, for example, the representative solution of the iteration is the incumbent solution, easier. But another concept we have to introduce is the notion of location, because there are so many possible solutions in the search space. So especially when we were modeling continuous spaces, we decided to name also a location, which is a part of the search space. So we have a partition of the search space. I will illustrate it in the next slide. And then what we do is simply concatenate, take the representative solutions and the dynamics of the algorithm, the different interaction, and then the edges will connect. So we have a representative solution of a start of our search process. So it can be the best initial solution in your population, and then you continue running the algorithm and you determine what is the solution or location of the next, and then you continue like that until hopefully you find the global optimum. So this is the idea. So the trajectory of the algorithm by the representative solution, and we have edges between consecutive locations of the representative solution, and that forms a graph. So that's the idea. I want to illustrate a little bit what I mean by locations. So, and this can be nicely seen if we are trying to optimize something in continuous space. Imagine we have a function that has 3 variables. These are the 3 variables. in continuous space. And then what we do is that instead of using this as a representative solution, because it has too many decimal digits, we decide to round the solution. You can imagine that this is kind of dividing the space into hypercubes, right? Each of them of size 0.1. So this solution becomes, after rounding, becomes this vector here. And then in order, because we want to have this as a signature for the nodes, remember we want to build a network, so we round in and then we convert it into integer, and then we concatenate it that this will be the ID for each node. So the search trajectory network will be a network where the nodes are these IDs of locations, and we will concatenate consecutive locations during the search process. So this is what we did, and this is in this paper we were using classical benchmark for continuous optimization. This is a unimodal function, a very easy function. And here, another thing we do is we can combine trajectories of two algorithms. So in this case, it's differential evolution and particle swarm optimization. And we decorate the network with the algorithms. For example, the locations of PSO are painted in orange and the location visited by differential evolution in blue. And in this particular case, there are 10 runs and they both start for the same initial location. And then you can see the trajectories. When we are visualizing in 3D, the set coordinates is fitness. And remember, I introduced the network layout. So this is just a force-directed layout. And then what we see is the trajectories. This is a very easy function, and all the trajectories reach the global optimum. In this case, the size of the nodes is proportional to the incoming degree, the incoming strength. So in this case, it's an easy function. Those algorithms reach the global optimum. In this particular case, it takes a little bit longer. You can see that the trajectories are slightly longer, but they all reach the global optimum. But for a harder problem, this is the Mikhailovic function that in 2 dimensions looks like that. Let me just move. And then you can see that we can only visualize in 2D, but that function has plateaus and several peaks. So if we run the search trajectory networks, starting from the yellow solution, you will see that the DE is more successful. All the runs, many of the runs reach the global optimum. You can see this gray node here, which we hypothesize is representing these plateaus. Many of the PSO get trapped here, and they are not able to escape. So they are trapped in this plateau, whereas the trajectories of differential evolution in blue can reach here, but you can see the size of the arrow is also proportional to the strength of to the number of trajectories that we're able to escape. So you can see here that differential evolution is able to escape this plateau, this point here, and reach the global optimum. The same visualization here in 3D. It's the same layout, but we added the fitness. We are minimizing, so you can see that the yellow trajectories getting trapped here. Some of them reach. You can see that the PSO 40% success rate. Some of the trajectories of PSO reach the global optima, but some others get trapped in this point and they are not able to escape. So I argue that search trajectory networks allow you to see what is going on in terms of the dynamics, where it points that trap the search process, etc. So we can also here see some that are points that are painted in green, which is that's interesting because these are points which are shared or visited by both algorithms. I find this interesting because if the algorithms have a completely different trajectories all the time, they never converge, I think it's less interesting. I think it's interesting when you have two different algorithms. Of course, they are searching the same problem, and they share in their trajectories some locations of the search space are visited by both algorithms. It is, of course, the case of this plateau that is visited by both. You can see that all the algorithms are reaching here, several runs. It is painted in gray to indicate that many runs go trapped there. Okay, so now we apply this to NEAT. NEAT, I mentioned, is a system for neuroevolution in which you evolve both the weights and the topology. It's mainly applied to reinforcement learning tasks on controlling robots. And at the time, it was an interesting system. I think it's outdated now. it was interesting because it solved some of the issues that were in other neuroevolution systems. It's a constructive system, meaning that it starts from an empty neural network and tries to build one by adding complexity. And it added some things in order to be able to do crossover in different lengths genotypes. So let's describe the genotype. The genotypes is basically two lists, a list of nodes. This is some sensor nodes, some hidden nodes, and some output nodes. So this is the phenotype. And then the connections. And then the connection have the input and output, the weights. And there is also this thing called a species to protect innovation. So that was a system that at the time was, and still used, and there are some variations like hyperneat, etc. So we decided to use the base system as a proof of concept in order to run STNs. So what we did is the very kind of canonical benchmark that we're using, evolving a neural network to solve the XOR and evolving a neural network to solve the double pole balancing problem. And we decided to contrast, because we wanted to contrast two variants of needs. So I decided, well, I proposed let's use contrast crossover versus no crossover. The innovation of the contribution that we did in this paper is that the genotype is not only a list of real numbers like I illustrated for the benchmark. It's more complicated than that. So what we did is, this is a genotype, but we needed a signature for the node. So one solution that we came up with is that using object serialization, so even though we still do the rounding of the weights in order to have locations, but then we flatten this using the pickle dumps, and then we have a string representation of each neural network. So this is what we did. We contrasted in the two benchmark with and without crossovers. So here recombination is in blue and no recombination is in red. And we were very surprised to find out that recombination was not useful for the XOR. So this is the no recombination, and this is the standard visualization in the fitness domain. Sorry, in the objective, yes, the fitness score. And the same happened with the double pole balancing. The non-recombination variant was outperforming the recombination one. So this is the visualization of STNs. Here is only 5 runs. And one thing I found frustrating, but it's a characteristic of neural networks, is that there is no, remember in my previews, I have a big red node to indicate the global optimum, because normally in this benchmark function, there is a single global optimum. In here, you can evolve many neural networks that have the same behavior that can solve the problem. So they're different at the level of the genotype, but they have the same or similar fitness. So all these black nodes are solutions or neural networks that solve the XOR problem. And you can see that the crossover variants, they're they take longer, much more exploration, but they are less efficient in terms of finding a solution, where the no crossover in red can find a neural network solving the problem faster with less search steps. And there is only some shared architectures early on at the beginning. So these are painted in gray because the two trajectories of the same algorithm or two trajectories of different algorithms visit the same kind of local optimum, the same neural network. And this is for the other problem, we found the same. The no crossover variant was most efficient, much shorter trajectories to find neural network solving the double pole balancing problem. Now, as a follow-up of that work, we decided to do something called Novelty Search, which was proposed again by this similar group of authors. And I think Novelty Search is a very fancy name for a very simple idea, really. So what we observed is that many different genomes can produce the same behavior, the same performance of the neural network. So, in our field, we have this idea of trying to promote genetic diversity. But the problem in this type of domain is that genetic diversity is not enough, because you may have completely different neural networks, but they have the same performance or the same behavior, because there is so much variability in the genotype space. So the idea is as simple, well, okay, we were going to try to reward diversity, not at the level of the genotype, but at the level of the behavior. And of course, what we mean by behavior is closer to phenotypic diversity and is problem dependent. So this is what we did. We used this maze navigation task, which is a bit more complicated than the previous ones. The idea is that you have a little robot that we don't have a robotic lab here in Stirling, so it's really a virtual robot. And then those tasks are also, we didn't have to implement them from scratch. They are available in some of the packages. So this task is to evolve a neural network that controls a robot that can solve a maze. And so this is the virtual robot. They have some sensors and some things related to orientation. So, and there are two mazes, the medium maze and the hard maze. The medium maze is easier to solve because the robot is guided. So this is the start of the maze and the end of the maze. And the Euclidean distance to the goal is kind of guiding the robot. So this type of maze, like this one, is misleading because there is a very close, Euclidean distance to the goal if you do that. But of course, there is a wall, so you will get trapped in these areas. So this is the problem. And what we try to do is to contrast search trajectory networks using fitness-based search and novelty-based search. And in this case, novelty simply means to favor those behaviors. In this case, behavior is simply navigation behaviors, which are different, which have not been explored. So basically, in this particular way, what means by behavior is just simply the end location after the navigation. And we again contrasted crossover and no crossover. So here we have 4 variants: fitness with crossover, fitness with no crossover, and novelty search versus fitness search. So what we observed, and we reproduced the same result that they found, that novelty search is better for the hard maze, and it also has better performance in both mazes, actually. Novelty search has better performance. And in terms of crossover, again, the variant without crossover, which is the dark one, was producing best performance. In the fitness base, it seems that crossover was slightly, beneficial. At least we found that in the fitness case, but not in the novelty case. So we again conducted the needs for comparing crossover, no crossover, novelty search, fitness search, and I will not explain everything here, but basically saying that with novelty search, the trajectory seems to be longer. You can see more convoluted than with fitness search. There is a lot of exploration. With fitness search, they are more kind of direct. In this case, yellow mean a solution. So in this case, you can see that both novelty search and fitness search can find a solution, but of course, the fitness is more direct. In the hard maze, fitness base was getting trapped in a local optima, and novelty search was able to find in some of the runs the solution, but after a lot of exploration. So if we look at what happened at the maze, fitness was of course greedy and was getting trapped. So novelty search was able, in some occasions, to find the goal in this maze. In the last work that we conducted with STNs for NEAT, we decided to visualize not the behavioral space. Here we are visualizing remember we used these pickle downs to visualize the genotype space. So in the last work, I'm not going to go into much detail, but we visualized the behavioral space, which is much smaller. It's just the position of the agent at the end of the navigation. And we can see, at least for my satisfaction, that at least the trajectories converge to a single solution, a single global optimum, because it's not like before that every trajectory, even though you're solving the problem, they are completely different in genotype space. If you use the behavioral space, at least you have the convergence of trajectories, because it is this novelty and fitness in the EC maze. And in the hard maze, the fitness is very direct, but it gets trapped in a local optima. And novelty search, okay, is able to find it, but it's really like a random search in the behavioral space. Having said that, and I'm a bit critical about novelty search, but I have to say that now they are combining in this novelty quality search. So they combine fitness and diversity, and it seems to be a good combination for the robotics domain. Okay, so I have the second and last case study to talk about, and this is about local optima networks. So let me briefly introduce local optima networks. In order to do that, a brief introduction of fitness landscapes. Fitness landscapes is a metaphor that has been there since evolutionary algorithms started. It's actually was proposed in the 30s by biologists, and it's a unifying metaphor because it's used in biology, it's also used in computational chemistry. They talk about energy landscapes, and even in machine learning, they talk about loss surfaces. So it's a unifying concept in which you have a search space as the plane, and you have as a height, that's the metaphor, you have the fitness. So this is a nice visualization, which is actually from a real neural network, and this paper in 2002. So of course, if you can only visualize 2 dimensions, but I like it because it illustrates that fitness landscape of real world problems can be not only multimodal, but they also have plateaus and bridges, etc. So mathematically, a landscape is an object that you have a search space, you have a notion of neighborhood structure or move operator, and the fitness function. And many metrics have been proposed to compute characteristics of the landscape, such as multimodality, ruggedness, neutrality, deceptiveness, etc. So local optima networks can be seen as a model of fitness landscape. They can be seen as a compressed model. If we continue using the metaphor of natural landscapes, local optima networks is a model where the nodes are local optima, and I here in this small illustration presenting what a local optima is. A local optima is a solution that has better fitness than all its neighbors. And there is a notion also of a basin of attraction. A basin of attraction is the set of solutions that if you run a hill climbing from any of them, you will end up in the same local optima. So in this diagram here, we have 2 local optima. This is actually the global optimum. And the idea of local optima networks is to build a network where the nodes are the local optima and the edges represent a notion of adjacency between the basins of attraction. We have proposed several edges. The basin was based really on the intersection of the basin of attraction, but the escape edges are a kind of approximation to the basin edges. Basically, what you do is you perturb a solution with a perturbation, and then you run hill climbing again. And if there is, and if you can reach another basin and another local optima, then you say there is an edge between them. So this is a cartoon version of a local optima network. The nodes are the peaks on this mountain change, and the edges represent some notion of adjacency between the basins of attraction. And I'm saying it's a compression of the search space, because if you consider the whole Himalayas is the search space, then the local optima network is a much smaller object. Here I cannot see the edges, but they are there. Okay, yes, so the edges, so it's a compressed model of the fitness landscape. And in order to construct local optima networks for real world problem, for complex problem, we have to sample. I mean, in the very early works with local optima networks, we were fully enumerating combinatorial landscapes, but for large instances and things like neuroarchitectural search or we need to enumerate. So in this case, what we are doing is, it's just an example, an animation, just to illustrate the connection between iterated local search and how we can construct a network from it. So iterated local search is a simple meta-heuristic, but it's a powerful one. You start from a random solution here, and then you run local search. You reach a local minimum, and then you perturb. By perturb meaning, for example, if you have a bit string, you change 2 bits, and then you run hill climbing again. Hopefully you will escape the basin, this basin. I mean, if you mutate too small, you will end up here. But if you have a sufficiently large perturbation, and then you run hill climbing again, from that perturbation, you will end up in another local optima. And you continue that. So this process constructs a network. You can see that the nodes are these ones, and the edges represent the connection between a perturbation followed by local search. So this animation here is actually running an iterated local search algorithm in a traveling salesman problem. And you can see that the nodes represent local optima, the edges represent perturbation followed by local optima. And we are trying to improve the search process. So getting harder and harder after a perturbation. So the white dots represent local optima that were not better in fitness. So the green represent the monotonic sequence, or we are accepting only improvements. So every time as soon as we progress in the search process, it becomes harder and harder to find a local optima that has better fitness than the incumbent solution. But you can also see that in the process, you are creating a network. And this is how we sample the landscapes to construct loans. Okay, so the case study that I'm going to present today is unpublished work, is submitted to PPSN, fingers crossed. So the idea is to use an existing NAS benchmark, and because there have been so much explosion and interest in neural architecture research, they have several benchmarks. And what I mean by tabular benchmark, some researchers computed the performance of all the possible architectures in the search space. So for us, it's only a lookup table, really. We don't have to run the neural networks again. So it's what they call a cell-based search space, which I prefer to call it like a block search space. So there is a fixed macro skeleton of this new deep neural network. And there is some cells which are embedded here. You can see them. And these are repeated n times, which in this particular case, benchmark is 5 times. So the problem of solving or of evolving an architecture really reduces to evolve the composition of a cell. So each of these cells is the same. I mean, it will conform an architecture, and the structure or the composition of a cell is a directed acyclic graph, and it has this structure. So it has 4 nodes, and it has these 6 connections, and each of them can be one of these 5 operations. So basically, it sounds very complicated, but at the end, the genotype, what we want to evolve, boils down to a combinatorial problem. Is really a string in this alphabet. So our genotypes are really vectors of size 6, where each of the members in the alphabet can be one of these operations. Right? So evolving the whole architecture really reduces to evolve this cell, and these cells can be encoded as a it's not a bit string, it's a string of integers or a string of symbols of a size 6. So the size of the search space is really not that large, it's 5 to the power of 6. So 15,000 different architectures. And the interesting thing is that, in this benchmark, they are provided to you. So it's like a relatively low-hanging fruit to conduct landscape analysis. So what we did is to conduct a fitness landscape analysis, standard techniques for landscape analysis, the density of state, fitness distance correlation, and plots, and loans. And we were also interested in studying the impact on noise in the performance estimation. And the reason is that in this benchmark, I think I have another slide for the benchmark. So the benchmark is an image classification data set. So they provide for this these are classical image classification data sets. So this benchmark that we are using pre-computed all the architectures in this cell-based search space for these 3 benchmarks, CIFAR10, CIFAR100, and ImageNet. And for each of them, each neural network was trained 3 times with 3 different random seeds. And they provide everything. They provide the loss, the accuracy, the test, train, and test. Okay, so this is what we did. We computed, this is the density of states, is a classical landscape analysis that simply is a histogram, really. What you plot here is the number of solutions with a certain fitness value. So this is a visualization only of the fitness value. So here is the different accuracies for the CIFAR 10, CIFAR100, and image 10. So, and we have 2 fitness functions. One is using a single training seed, and the other one that we call F average uses the 3 seeds that are available there. So this one is less noisy because, training a neural network really depends on the seeds. But if you have an average of 3, it's the only that is in the benchmark. So I know 3 is not statistically significant, but this is all what we have. So anyway, here you can see the accuracy, the distribution of accuracy for the whole landscape. And what we can observe here is that this is the easier instances. So most of the architectures have an accuracy over 80. So it's very easy to find an architecture that have over 80. But still, we have this very fast decay. For CIFAR10, there are a wider distribution of accuracies. You can see also here that the y-axis, the horizontal axis is different. And for ImageNet, which is the harder of the instances, there is a more variety of possible accuracies. One interesting thing that I observed when I plotted this is this peak here. I mean, we have, remember, this is all the architectures, all the accuracies in all the architectures in the search space. So this peak is strange. So there is a high count of architectures that have a very low accuracy. And I find that curious. It happened in all of them. So what did it mean? So I decided to explore the architectures themselves. So I proposed these genotype maps. So what I'm plotting here, remember our genotype is really a vector of 6 numbers, of 6 symbols, sorry. So what I'm plotting here, let's start with here. I'm plotting the worst 1% genotypes. So if you plot them, you will see that most of them are blue. And remember, blue is the operation which is zero. Zero eyes, I didn't mention, but zero eyes meaning that this operation is basically removed, it's not there. So these are basically empty cells. Most of the symbols are A, representing empty cells. So basically this is kind of Alzheimer's neural networks in the sense that they at least these cells is mostly empty. So that's an explanation, I think, for this peak. So these architectures that have many zeros are not performing well. On the other hand, the architectures that are performing best, they also show a pattern. I forgot to mention, each of them is aligned. This is a heat map, really, and a heat map where I'm coloring the genotypes with the color that they represent. So, for example, this is the top one performing. So there will be the first symbol is a D, the second symbol is a D, the third is a D, the fourth is a B, etc. So you will see that most of the top performing cells in all the benchmark, the majority of the symbols is D, and the second one seems to be C, etc. So we computed the frequency of appearance of the symbols in the best architectures. We also computed the famous fitness distance correlation plots, which indicate that these landscapes are not random. These landscapes have, the fitness distance correlation plots show that as you are closer to the optimal, you have higher fitness. So there is a gradient towards the global optimum, but we can also see that there are architectures which are relatively close, having distance 2 or 3 to the best, and have very, very low fitness. And the correlation is in between 30 or 40. So these landscapes are non-trivial, but they are also not completely rugged or random. And the final study that we did is to extract the local optimal networks of this neural architecture search. And again, here we are comparing the 3 benchmarks, CIFAR10, CIFAR100, and ImageNet, and the 2 fitness functions. Remember, this fitness function uses a single training process for the networks. And this one is less noisy because it uses the average. So what is interesting is that the number of remember in local optima, the nodes represent the number of local optima. Each circle is a local optima, and the global optimum is in red. So you will see that the number of nodes is smaller when you have a noise reduction. So for example, in here we have 10 local optima only, and if you have the noisy function, it will be 19, and the same pattern is observed in all the images, data sets. And what is also interesting is that those landscapes were not very difficult. For example, here, the only one step ahead, you will find the global optimum, and many, at least in the CIFAR10, a simple hill climbing will solve the problem. And in the other landscapes, it's a bit more complicated, but a few steps ahead, you can find the global optimum. We also decided to implement an iterated local search algorithm for this domain, because I said, well, these landscape dots are not very difficult to search. I'm confident that something simpler than an evolutionary algorithm will do well in this landscape. So we tried that. We implemented an iterated local search, 2 versions of the iterated local search. One is shuffled, meaning that the neighborhoods are explored in shuffle order. And the other one is the landscape-aware one, uses this idea that the order in which the operations are more frequent. So remember, the D operation was more frequent in the top performing cell, followed by the green. So the only thing we do is to explore the neighborhoods in this order. And you can see here that compared to the state of the art, which is this regularized evolutionary algorithm, our ILS, which is barely 5 lines of code, is performing best, at least in 2 of the benchmarks. I have to say that the difference is not very much, and I wouldn't claim statistical significance. Actually, if you see the box plots, you will see the iterated local search is better in this one. It's not necessarily, it's very comparable. I think evolution is slightly better in this one. But you can see also that random search is not far there, and the algorithms perform differently. But this reinforcement learning is a very complicated algorithm, and REA is not a complicated evolutionary algorithm, but basically more complicated than the iterated local search. So anyway, this is what I wanted to say today. I'm sorry if I went too fast. I did want to give some time for questions and comments. So this is my last slide indicating that, well, hopefully these search trajectory networks and local optimal networks are an accessible way to understand both problems and algorithms. And if we before have a dark, search space, now hopefully with these tools we can have an illuminated landscape and trajectories and better understanding. Right. Thank you, Sandy. I hope I wasn't aware of time. I don't know if I overrun.
I think we're just about spot on. There's a couple of minutes for questions. Obviously, if people are wanting to depart, then feel free to do that. But yeah, if you can either raise your hand or I think you can post a message to everyone.
You can also unmute yourselves as well.
Indeed, yes, we're a friendly audience here. I've got one kind of fairly minor question, I guess. When just while people are warming up, way back when you were talking about NEAT, I think it would have been about slide 20-ish or thereabouts. You had.
Do you want me to share again?
Oh, if you could, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, no problem. So having said that, we started 5 minutes late, I mean 5 minutes, so it's not too bad, my timing.
No, your timing's spot on.
Okay.
If we always started on the hour, then it would be fine.
Yeah, okay.
So it was probably about slide 20-ish, but you had the two plots, and there was the convergence on the two different things, and one of them had quite a lot of points, and the other one didn't have all that many at all. Yeah, keep going a wee bit. Maybe a couple more on from here. Yeah, this one. Well, you have that's right, it was the novelty search. So there's hardly any points in the bottom right, but there's loads on the bottom left. Is that just because there's a lot of points essentially sitting on top of each other on the right? Or
so which one? What do you mean? You mean this?
So it's more the figure on the bottom left.
Okay,
so you've got like the novelty search seems to be visiting quite a lot of points.
Yes.
Whereas the fitness.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's going on there?
Yeah, that's what's going on. That's what I put this. What happened here is that fitness search gets trapped in the global. This is the visualization of the trajectories of the robots in the maze.
Yeah.
I know it's complicated because this is a visualization of the search space, and this is a visualization of the actual visualization of the behavior of the agents. So the fitness search, you're visualizing the top two best evolved neural networks, and they were always getting trapped in this. I mean, the robots is just basically doing this. It never escaped here, and that's why you are seeing the search is relatively short, but it's always getting trapped in this corner. But what happened is that fitness is really based on perceived distance to the goal. So if you're only rewarding the agents for fitness, the sensors are kind of computing the Euclidean distance to the goal. So it's never really exploring with fitness outside. So it's always try to go to the goal, and because there is a wall here, it gets trapped. So that was going on. And then novelty search, because it's rewarding just a behavior that I haven't seen before, it's able in some of the runs to do this, to go to the goal.
Right. So it's just that there's a lot more freedom with the novelty search. So it's and what you're seeing there in the plots is that freedom. It's
exactly.
that they're exploring the space.
It's a little bit like random search, I have to say, but it's a random search in the behavior space. It's like random search directed by a combination of random search and taboo search, if you like. I mean, you're trying to see a behavior you haven't seen before. So that's what it's doing.
No, that's really interesting. I mean, I do like a lot of these figures. reveal what you might have expected intuitively, but this is us actually seeing it, you know, in a much more concrete form. So that's very helpful. I can see that there is a hand raised. So Peter.
Hello, Peter. How are you?
Ask.
I think you're muted.
It's very slow, so I click on it and unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
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 Yeah. Hello, Peter.
Doesn't always work. So I was just thinking it's 30 years since I submitted my PhD, which was about designing neural networks.
Yeah, I know. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I did was a recombination operator that addresses the symmetry problem. But the problem that I got was a form of severe overfitting, and I was just wondering whether that has been addressed. So what I was doing was training networks to solve a simple sort of classification problem. And so you have a training set and a validation set and a test set, and you use the validation set to stop the network getting over trained on the training set, and then your performance is given by your performance on the test set. But because the test set is within the genetic algorithm loop, what I ended up with was a network which, when trained on that training set and validated on that validation set, did really well on that test set. So it fitted it very precisely to the particular conditions. You know, GAs are just so powerful. So has the field solved that?
I see. That's a very good question. I have to say that I was surprised. I was positively surprised when I'm trying to take a little bit of my sabbatical for reading, and I came across with your papers and that. So yes, I think you're right. The problem is that the search phase happens in the validation set, and then the evaluation is in the test set. I don't think that has been very much explored. The only thing that I have seen is something that they call early stopping. So instead of, you don't want to run the GA until the global optimum in the training, in the validation set. So you want to stop early. So actually having an algorithm that is not that very good at converging may be better. I hope also that the work with local optima networks can be helpful, because maybe you want a local optima, not necessarily the global optimum in the validation set, because it can do better in the test set. But I think it's not, I'm only starting to read the literature. It may be some extra work there, but I think it hasn't been analyzed systematically. But I agree with you, there is a challenge there, because you are evolving in one part and then the final test is in another. So I think this generalization and specialization thing have to be explored. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great talk. I'm going to have to go quite soon because there's another talk at 4 o'clock.
Thanks, Peter. So I see there's one more question has appeared in the chat. Does making these visualizations in 3D make it easier to interpret?
I didn't have too many 3D in this talk, but because I decided not to, let me see the 3D that I have here. I think I have some 3D in it's in the first case study, isn't it? In the search trajectory networks. I think it helps. For example, in here, you can see if you have fitness, and fitness is minimization, you can, for example, see this plateau is very close to the global optimum, for example, whereas maybe you cannot see that in the flattened version. So of course there is projection, etc. But at least, this is how it looks in 2D. So the plateau is very close to it's not far from the global optimum. So here you can also see it makes sense some algorithm to get trapped here because it's not so far. I guess it can bring some insight. But I haven't tried the 3D visualizations in the NAS or NEAT yet, but the idea is that you can at least have some indication of how far, if you have a local optimum, how close or far it is from. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. So I am not seeing any more questions appearing.
I actually have one, if that's all right, Sandy.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Ken.
It's more of a sort of general question, Gabriela. On your second last slide, I think it was your last results slide, You kept talking about how one algorithm was much simpler than the other, but providing better results. And it led me. Are you personally curious about the simplicity of algorithms and their performance? Do you think there's some sort of intrinsic link to complexity or simplicity versus algorithmic performance?
That's a very good point. I don't think I have thought in those terms. But what I think is, I mean, if you can solve a problem with a simpler algorithm, you shouldn't use a complicated one. I'm thinking that, I mean, at least iterated local search, I have become a little like a fan of iterated local search. It's not a very sexy algorithm, right? But you know, if local search is a good heuristic in your domain and you can escape them, then at least the local optima networks show, I mean, there are not too many steps. And in this landscape, 2 or 3 steps, so you escape a local optima, you escape again, and then you hit the target. So it may not be necessary to have something as sophisticated as an evolutionary algorithms always. But I don't know, simplicity. I mean, if there is the oak and razor principle, no, you should try to have the simplest model that you can in order to solve the problem. And at least I'm saying, okay, maybe iterated local search is not enough. Maybe we need something else, but at least we should try the simple algorithms first and not only go with the ones which are more complex because they're more sexy.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Yeah, it so happens I was involved in a piece of work a wee while ago where we tried applying different estimation of distribution algorithms to different problems, and we had a problem that had so a cancer chemotherapy optimization problem, a lot of structure dependencies between variables, really complicated, and we applied the kind of state-of-the-art algorithm that used Bayesian models to try and capture that, and a really stupid simple algorithm that totally ignored any of that structure. And the really simple stupid algorithm beat the complicated one hands down. It was the complicated one was getting basically lost in all of that complexity. It needed a lot more data to be able to fit its models. And I think that there probably is a growing amount of evidence for that kind of sometimes simple algorithms are going to win. And I think this kind of analysis helps us to understand where that's the case much better, because back then we didn't really have much more than a gut instinct. So
I have to say that maybe these type of algorithms are harder to publish because people don't believe it. If you tell them no, crossover doesn't work, and they are not happy to hear that. You know, a genetic algorithm has to have crossover. You know, this is too simple, you know, it's not interesting. But I guess maybe from the engineering point of view, we should be open to simpler algorithms sometimes, I think.
Well, yeah, if you've gone to all the effort of formulating the problem and the encoding and the fitness function, you get the cheap algorithms for free. You know, I mean, you know, that's simple iterated local search. It's easy to apply that. So you try it and you see if it works.
It does make me wonder if there's a correlation between how complex the problem is and how complex the solver needs to be. Perhaps if we need to have more jumps around a search space, we need to have something that can provide a changing dynamic search over time or something that adds some complexity. But perhaps if it's a simpler search, maybe if it's a very well connected network, then perhaps we need simpler solvers. I don't know if there is an intrinsic link. It's just a gut feeling, I guess.
Another thing I have to say, to be fair with evolutionary algorithms and to more complex algorithms, is that of course we are single objective. So if you have multiple objectives, maybe, I mean, there is a proof that having a population can help. I know there are local search-based multi-objective algorithms, Pareto local search, and they are not that much used. So at least we should also use them. No? And sometimes, of course, if you have population, you can parallelize maybe better, even though you can parallelize local search as well. But I'm not saying, you know, there is no room for more complex algorithms, but I mean, we should try with the simpler algorithms as well.
Very interesting.
Well, from over at MSU, thank you so much, Gabrielle. We really appreciate hearing your talk, and I can tell by the chat people very much enjoyed it as well. And I think you've encouraged a lot of really interesting discussion too. So thank you so much for presenting today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I was telling both of you that the presentation last week made a high, bar for visualization, and visualization is my thing. I try to also.
Your slides were also excellent.
Succeeded.
Okay, thank you everybody, and yeah.
Thank you all.
It's always cool to be able